Tonight, this committee is gathering to discuss next steps in response to the two presentations on the all-male shelter planned for Rego Park. To those in attendance tonight, meaning non-board members, this is a meeting and not a town hall. We won't be taking questions or comments from the public tonight. If you have questions, you can email the office at qn06@cb.nyc.gov. Our next meeting will be on the 7th of February. If you would like to make a public comment at that time, you just use that email address to sign up, and you need to sign up before 3 o'clock on the 7th. The board will not be voting on the shelter, as the decision to move this shelter into this location is not ours. It rests within the upper levels of city government. Our goal is to create a form of oversight and accountability to ensure that the shelter meets its goals and that the community life remains undisrupted. Some have complained about how this board is handling this matter. Our joint committee members are a loyal, hardworking bunch that are committed to the dignity of providing housing, whether it be a shelter or affordable housing, and they love this community very much. Our chairs come to this work fully equipped. One chair brings to this work firsthand experience with housing insecurity and has always shared their insights as to all the obstacles that exist. Our other chair brings years of experience in the social housing space and has a collaborative spirit. And if you knew where he went for his undergrad, you'd also know he's a smarty pants. Our board has been fully transparent regarding this project in all meetings on the subject. Lastly, we ask that if you have an issue with how we serve this community, you call us and talk with us. Talking to anyone else isn't the right path. So tonight, we welcome you to this meeting. We are going to do our best to have a very good, respectful conversation. We want to deal tonight in fact, not fiction. We want to put together an agreement that both protects the residents of this shelter and protects this community and allows both of these communities to thrive in coexistence with one another. I know that this committee will do a fabulous job, and I'm going to now shut up and I'm going to turn it over to Keith. And I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. And again, I very much appreciate all of y'all, if that's a thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that introduction. That was very well said. I also want to introduce the chair of the Committee for Those Without Shelter, Latrice Davis.
Good evening, everyone.
Again, I'm Keith Engel, the chair of the Land Use and Housing and Landmarks Committee. Looking forward to the conversation tonight, just to be able to kind of like take a step back and have a conversation, kind of following up from what both committees heard at the initial presentation from DSS and CHI, and then the board meeting. So I think it's just a moment that we felt we needed at the end of the last board meeting, really just to kind of like take a step back, consider what this means, consider what any sort of recommendation might mean as well. I do want to start out just by kind of establishing context. I'm someone that loves facts, definitely more facts than Facebook fiction. So I do want to put a couple of things out there as they kind of pertain to this notion of fair share. I don't want to be anyone about the head with this, but I think as we know, as members of the community district, and that's all well and good, we also are part of New York City writ large. And as part of the city charter, every community district has a role to play as it pertains to sheltering those that need such. Our community district at this present time has 0 shelters. And I'm going to just share my screen really quickly just to, as I was stuck on the F train tonight trying to get home in time for this meeting, I kind of downloaded some data from New York City open source data just so we can just show some figures as to how our neighbors compare. I'm just going to share a screen for 1 second. Just bear with me 1 second. Let me know when folks can see my screen.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, thank you. So I was going to do this really quickly. basically what I want to highlight is we are a community district. So basically, taking a step back, this is New York City shelter buildings across the entire city spectrum, currently operated by or held by a DHS, consisting of, and let me just expand this a little bit so we can all see a little bit better, because I do believe in transparency so that everyone that's part of this program can actually see this data. So basically, this consists of a community districts all across the entire 5 boroughs: Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, kind of itemizing adult family communities, adult family shelters, adult shelters, FWC, which stands for Families with Children Clusters. So adult communal hotel, things of that nature. So really just the city kind of breaking down this data. So scrolling through the numbers really quickly, we are Community District 406. That's Regal Park and Forest Hills. You'll notice that that is completely and utterly missing between 405 and 407. I also want to highlight our neighbors, 404, which is Elmhurst and Corona. They presently have three shelters as of like the end of October. They have one in the adult shelter hotel category, and one in these 2 categories, which is families with children, commercial hotel, and families with children shelter. Our neighbors to the west, Regal Park, that's Community District 409. Just highlight that again so everyone can see. You'll see there is one shelter in the adult shelter category. So going to the numbers really quickly. Yeah, 406 is just not present. So now we're looking at 2 shelters, although it's kind of, it remains to be seen how transitional housing kind of translates into shelter. It's a little bit of a different animal altogether. But again, we are looking at basically the timing of 2 shelters landing in our district pretty much next year. So with that, I do want to kind of take a step back. Latrice, I don't want to hog the mic, so please feel free to kind of chime in with your context as well.
Well, as you mentioned, both of these pending shelters would be located in Regal Park. One is for families with children, and the other is for single men. And I mean, I know that like I was going over the resolution that was handed to us by a community member at the meeting back on the 10th. I also quickly reviewed Peter's draft resolution. I don't want to give my thoughts right now because I'm still trying to like organize my thoughts. But I do want to say I always expected opposition to this. As Heather alluded to in her comments, it's a lot of the opposition is rooted in fear of change, but also ignorance. I take issue with the tropes that have been trotted out about homeless people, namely they're drug addicts or they're mentally ill. The majority of people who experience homelessness are just like you and me. And just like all of us are one accident away from being disabled, a lot of us are one step away from being on the wrong side of this equation. It's not a good feeling to experience housing insecurity, and I can only imagine that the same would go for homelessness. In my travels, when I'm a transit user, I take the train, bus, wherever I'm going, I see homeless people at 71st Continental, at 67th Avenue, 75th Avenue, Kew Gardens, even 63rd Drive. Now, we just broke out of a cold spell. We're finally back above freezing. The past week, to have those people sleep wherever they could get, wherever they could. And we've all heard horror stories about shelters. It's like, if the shelter is so bad that a person would rather sleep out on the street, given the conditions that we just got out of last night, that should be a red flag. And so I just want to make that clear to those who are watching that homelessness isn't about a bad choice. This could happen to any of us. And in terms of the approach and the steps that we're taking now, the plans that were presented to us have not been perfect. I don't expect them to be. There are going to be hiccups along the way, and we're not going to get everything that we want. Those who were at the meeting know that I took issue with the curfew. And even though I understand why we have a curfew, again, it still bothers me because at the end of the day, we're dealing with, at least with the single men's shelter, we're dealing with adults, not children. Curfews are for kids, like trick cereal. Like, but never mind that. So I feel that in terms of what happens with this men's shelter, again, these are gentlemen who are opting in for social services. They don't want a handout. They want a hand up, and we'll help them with that hand up. This hand up is not a blank check. I also want to make that clear to those who have issues with the homeless shelter proposal. It's not a blank check. They have to do their part to get themselves going, and we want to help in that regard. Because I don't want to see anyone sleeping under the LIE overpass by the post office. No one deserves to live that way. And I imagine most of these people who are experiencing homelessness now, they want to get off the street. They just need help figuring that out. Because, I mean, as an able-bodied working person, it took me more than a year to find an apartment. More than a year. And when I look back on my situation, it's just crazy. Like, I imagine, God forbid, I was a domestic violence survivor or a trans person, or I aged out of foster care. Like, again, people end up homeless for a variety of reasons, or a veteran who served the country. There's just so many reasons people end up in that situation. It is not our place to judge them. That is God's job. And so with that, I'm going to shut up. And I am open to hearing feedback from anyone at this meeting, whether you're a constituent, a board member. I mean, basically, one more thing I do want to say. For those who are quick to complain, if you have a better idea, I am all ears. I repeat, if you have a better idea, I am all ears. Thank you.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. Oh, Chase, I do want to add too, because I think like a lot of common tropes that we hear, and I mean, like, full disclosure, I have a career where I focus on affordable housing, so therefore my work includes a lot of affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, supportive housing, and shelters. So basically, from being out front of these meetings a lot of time when there's a lot of vindictive kind of like placed at me, I recognize, I hear more often than not, why a shelter? Why not affordable housing? We're for affordable housing, but we just can't have shelters in our district. I just want to like remind everyone that basically we are in the midst of a humanitarian crisis right now with the affordability crisis that's kind of rocketing through our entire country, let alone our entire city. It is exacerbated by the migrant crisis right now. But you know, shelters are part of basically what I see as a tripartite way to provide affordable housing. Like, affordable housing isn't just affordable housing. There's also layers that get you to there. There's supportive housing for those that actually have needs and can't really like exist in affordable housing on their own. And the layer, you know, below that, that's kind of like the catch-all, is shelter. I guess that kind of like first stop emergency, you know, recourse to kind of move you into affordable housing. Usually folks exit the shelter system to go into supportive housing and then affordable housing. So that's kind of how the cycle should happen if we are truly to be considerate of like providing affordable housing across the district. One thing I also want to kind of underscore is that homelessness does not mean joblessness. A lot of people do work. It's just that, you know, for some reason ends can't be met. So all that being said, I think I do want to open it up, you know, to just our committee members, just for comments, takeaways. I also want to thank members of the public that have put forward their public comments. I think we do appreciate all discourse on the matter. We just hope that it remains respectful and equitable. I do want to thank the gentleman that also put forward the resolution. That was very, very well thought out. And we are going to be kind of using that a little bit tonight as we talk through our thoughts. I think the end goal for this evening is basically where the committee stand in terms of a resolution we can take to the board, and also any questions that we might have for you know, DSS or CHI. We're not saying that the questions were answered in full or even well. I still have some lingering questions, but with that, I'll open it up. If folks can raise hands. I see David had his hand up for a bit. Maybe we can just start there. Latrice, how does that sound?
I'd just
Well,
like
I
to
see David's
clarify,
hand up.
I'd just like to clarify those very nice remarks by Latrice. The people you see who don't want to go into shelters are the ones who don't want to go into those very large shelters that give you some housing from the outside. These are the ones that make the impression on the public. We're not talking about those. The 30th Street, the big Kingsbridge one. Those are the ones that make the papers and some of these people want to avoid. We're talking about a managed shelter that you have to be accepted in. In fact, the 2022 Comptroller's report on these shelters, which I don't fully understand, I was hoping somebody who does goes through it, notes that these shelters create the best leads for people who want to get real housing because they can't stand these big shelters. There's crime, there's no services. So the good ones try to apply for the type of housing we're talking about. But otherwise, I like Latrice's remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I know John had some feedback as well. Is John here?
He's there.
Talk if there are some questions, perhaps. I mean, I'll just say that as someone who happens to be an employee of the Department of Social Services, while I have a right to participate and discuss the matter, I will have to recuse myself from any vote. I would rather basically deal with this. The one thing I would say though, and which was mentioned, I believe, at the previous committee meeting that I wasn't at, but was not mentioned, was the need to develop kind of a community advisory board over once those facilities are opened. And I just wanted to say that has been a positive thing in the past for other things. And, I don't know why it wasn't mentioned by the people there, but I think it's something that I think, you would want to look at. But as I said, other than that, I would rather stay pretty quiet, just because of the fact that I do have a conflict on this matter. But thank you for asking.
No, because I saw your email and you definitely you raised valid points. Even though I understand your conflict, that doesn't diminish your contribution in any way. And I definitely want to keep those thoughts in mind as I move forward on navigating it, because this is a huge problem. And I never claim to have an answer. I don't have a magic wand or anything of the sort, but I do believe that however this ends up, I do believe we'll be helping people more than hurting them.
Yes, no, I agree. And as I said, I think those are issues. I think the operator, how they're actually going to be, providing their services, what services are important items that have to be dealt with. And as I said, I think that's how well the thing operates is very important. And, I think that was the basis for a number of the things I was saying. So thank you.
I see his hand up. Anicia?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, your hand is up. If you have the floor if you want it.
Yeah. Okay. I have two comments. One positive and one that I need more clarification. Okay.
Sure.
I'm very happy for the building for women's and children, because people don't realize when children are in shelters and they can move from one shelter to another one. Okay, the school, they sometimes they had to stop going to that school that they were used to, and then they had to, sometimes the parents has to bring them far places, because sometimes they move them from one place to another one that is not close by. So that it would be very good for those people that they were lucky enough to be placed in that shelter, because there will be, I don't know if that shelter is going to be a permanent shelter that could be living there for some time or longer time. And my thing is for the children, for the school children, that they will feel more safe, they will have more confidence and they're not going to be disturbed because they've been moving from one school to another one, lose their friends and everything. My second comment is about the male shelter. The male shelter, we need more information about the male shelter. Are they going to have to be leaving at 9 o'clock in the morning and don't come back until 11 o'clock? Because that's one of the biggest problems with the shelters. I have my person that does my taxes for 20 years. It's Audubon Avenue, Manhattan, between 180 and 179. It was a garage. It was a nice, quiet. It's all Hispanic people, the majority. You know, everybody mind their own business. They know each other. And they sold the garage and they made a shelter. When I went last year, I got scared because there were most drug addicts in the street, in the side, in front of the stores. The store owners are very upset because what's going on. And not only the shelter people, the drug dealers selling them the drugs. They went around. I had to park far from the front of the store, and I was afraid because I saw two junkies, because that's what we used to call them in the 70s. Okay, and I was scared because they could grab my pocketbook. I'm old, you know, and they know they push me, I'm going to fall on the floor. So I didn't feel safe. And that's why something that we need from them, commitment, that they would be able to control this and not mess up the neighborhood. Because I live here for 57 years, okay? And it's always been a quiet neighborhood. That's my comment.
Okay, and I want that for everyone. You know, I've lived here since 2018. I like the location. I like the people. I mean, I would like things to stay as they are, but as Heather noted, things do change, and change is a part of living. I want everyone to be safe. Now, I understand you're concerned about the bad apples, but again, I would say the majority of people who are experiencing homelessness are not drug addicts. They're
I think what would be helpful here would be if Keith could kind of walk us through what they shared at the meeting as far as what the daily programming is, what their requirements are, and how they're different from that whole having to leave the shelter and come back sort of thing. Keith, could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just about to chime in too on the question that Anita raised, because this question did come up during the initial presentation from DSS and CHI, and shelter people do not have to leave the shelter during the day. That much was clarified. In terms of the demographic, the folks on site, it's not a demographic that has severe mental health issues. So I think we have to be very careful with some of these groups that kind of come out there as we consider adult male shelters. So just to kind of go over the overall presentation from CHI, and again, I just want to clarify that CHI does have spaces that they manage in the city. I think they have like 10 emergency housing programs right now in New York City, including the one that's being proposed in Regal Park. So they're not outliers in this. In terms of like programs and services, what they're going to be providing are a homeownership program, counseling, financial literacy programs, foreclosure prevention counseling, homeownership counseling, etc. The shelter will have case management, such as like a housing first approach, on-site workshops and activities. There will be crisis intervention and behavioral management. They'll be focused on food insecurity, like they'll be providing 3 meals a day to the clients. There'll be 24/7 contracted security. There'll be guard posts at the front door and other access points of the building. There'll be security cameras. And most importantly, there will be supportive services. People won't be here in a vacuum. There's going to be health and mental health and substance abuse services on site. There's going to be housing and independent living counseling on site, employment, recreation, and skills development, as well as like conflict resolution and mediation. So there's like a bevy of on-site programs to kind of like help those that are actually in the shelter. In terms of the community advisory board, because this is a very big thing, and I'm glad I forgot who mentioned it, but this is not going to just land in the district and then all is for naught. There's going to be a community advisory board created with local stakeholders that basically will be kind of weighing in on the shelter's operation over time. It's going to be held, quarterly and as needed. Stakeholders, which CB6 has already submitted a list, will include community board members. It'll include neighbors. It'll include a DSS and DHS representatives, as well as the NYPD and FDNY. There's a lot of eyes on this. Again, it's not going to just land and be unmitigated. So that's kind of like just a refresh on CHI's presentation. So I do see a number of hands that are propped up over time. I know, Mark, you've had your hand up for a bit, followed by Ida and Herbie. You have your hand up as well.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Yep.
So I'm going to start by framing my comments. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I actually have a client who's currently residing in a shelter, and she's reported to me some of the challenges that she's faced in her shelter. And I kind of like, I know in the previous meetings, I've asked some questions of CHI in terms of how they're going to address some of the issues that she actually has raised with me in terms for her shelter. So just like today, for example, I just saw her today, and one of the stories she told me was that she got into, there was a fellow resident who actually assaulted her, and she got hit by this resident, and she was explaining to me how it was managed by the shelter. And I can go into more, I don't want to go into detail publicly, but I could share it. I'd be very curious to hear if the CHI, how would they address a situation like this? Because this is a real life situation. So that's one comment. A second comment. So from what I recall, and Keith, maybe you can correct, or what I recall, they're not going to have all services on site. There's a need to maybe expand on mental health services as well as substance abuse services. So I'm curious to know, is this shelter is scheduled to open in March? Is that accurate? It's going to be open in the next few months. That's what's projected. So at what point are they going to begin reaching out to local community providers to begin to organize those services? Because from what I recollect, they don't have all the services on site, and they had said they were going to have community partners to provide those services. So I would hope they're not going to wait till they actually open and then start looking for the organizations that they're going to be working with. I would hope they would do a little preliminary work first. So that's my second comment. And a suggestion, I don't know if we've got the ability to do this, I think it would be good to kind of find out what are the shelters they run, and perhaps we can have a discussion with some of those, some of those shelters in terms of getting a sense, or maybe they even have some data in terms of, I think at one of the previous meetings, I did question how quickly they are able to place people. And, the answer that I got was, it depends. Well, I'd be curious to see if they have any data from their previous shelters in terms of how many people they were able to place, and what percentage, and how quickly they place them. Because again, it gives a little bit more of a sense of the track record. Now, I know they do have some shelters here in New York, but my understanding is they don't have that many shelters in New York. This would be one of the first ones. So be curious to see what their track record is. And those are my three main comments at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Peter, I saw your hand up a ways back. You still have a question?
Thanks. Yeah, actually, no, one thing I just want to add right now, because of what Mark had mentioned, I do want to stress, so everybody understands, that there is a selection process for residents into the single male shelter. They get screened before they're sent out to Queens. And as part of that process, the intent is to screen out those who require mental health services or drug abuse services. Ultimately, in any population, there's still going to be some folks who may not have been displaying those issues when they were screened. But I do want to emphasize that that was one of the things they did answer, that they were going to make sure to try and screen for those. The other comment I just wanted to make was I think it's really important for us to keep focus on the need for these services in the city. As you said, Keith, that we are part of the city writ large as well. And when we look at where these facilities are being located, they're being located on near Queens Boulevard, near transportation, near shopping, in terms of where they could have ended up in the district, these are probably some of the best locations for these kind of facilities. When we go through it, and already the questions we've been asking shows that there has been quite a bit of attention paid to details like screening, services, and security. The key, I think, for us will be to ensure that we stay on top of how the facilities are rolled out, that DHS is living up to the promises that it makes to us. And that's where the Community Advisory Board, what we've actually proposed is that we have a single CAB, Community Advisory Board, that covers both facilities. In the normal course, each facility gets its own, but then we were concerned that there could be similar issues at both facilities. But then left-hand, right-hand issues would occur where people didn't necessarily know what was happening at the other facility. So we thought one CAB that brought in all the different stakeholders would be a way for us to keep a better track. And also, it's easier to meet once a quarter and cover both facilities than trying to have people make a whole bunch of separate meetings. So we just need to make sure that we create some document on the record in which we're able to hold DHS accountable to the promises they're made, but then also to recognize our responsibility to help do our part to provide our neighbors the services that they need, and hopefully get away from I've seen some of the comments that have come in, and some of them are just these fantastical, they're drug addicted, psycho crazy immigrants from Venezuela, and that's not what's happening at all. And it's really shameful that we're devolving in some instances into those kind of conversations rather than keeping our focus on what's real, which is there, but for the grace of God, go I. We lose our job and our family's not there to support us. And, we can be there, as Latrice was saying, oh so quickly. We need to suspend some of our judgment and think more about how can we solve the problem, make this work. Anyway, I said enough. Thank you.
That's a really good point, Peter, and I totally appreciate that. I think you raised a good point about the possibility of a combined community action board. Perhaps if we are kind of veering towards a resolution, this could be something that we underscore just in terms of feedback to DHS and what might make things palatable. And I also want to make everyone aware, members of the committee and the public at large, that we certainly understand that shelters have their issues. Myself, as a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm fully aware of the fact that most LGBTQ folks would rather sleep on the subway than be in a shelter, just given given what happens sometimes. So not to use that statement to undermine what shelters do. We're aware of the problems. I think it's just a question of how do you make the best of what's present, and really vetting the agency and vetting the nonprofit agency to make sure that the proper services are being provided. So I think Ida has a question, followed by Herb.
Hi. Did you call on me, Keith?
I think Ida first. She had her hand up for a bit. So I think Ida, you're on mute.
There we go. Okay, I think that's it. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so thanks very much for this presentation. And I was really impressed actually with a lot of the comments that you sent along to review, that nobody was complaining about the family shelter. All of the comments that were sent along to me to read had to do with the male shelter. And you mentioned about ignorance. I think for me anyway, what are the facts actually about, the type of people that are going into these shelters, and the track record, as Mark was saying, not only in terms of placement, but also in terms of the community problems that people seem to expect that there are going to be these tons of problems. So I guess my question is, what is the issue with crime around these shelters? What historically and also just in terms of the people who are running these shelters, what is their track record in terms of crime, in terms of drugs, in terms of violence in the neighborhood? It doesn't seem to be that the community is up in arms about the family shelter. It's really the questions that they have, and maybe based on ignorance of what actually happens with these male shelters.
Okay. That's a good question. I mean, I would say that perhaps like some of the perceptions are largely based on what the media portrays as opposed to what's actually steeped in data. There was a good public comment that was put forward that I can't locate right now that actually put forward some data that actually claimed that basically there is no significant bad effects of shelters and districts. Can't quite find that right now, but that was part of the
Yes.
public comment.
Mhm.
Herb?
Yeah, hi. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so I just have two questions. Is one, the word shelter. I have a children's book about houses, and it has the title is Houses. Then it has a lot of pages about houses. We speak about this one word shelter, and Mr. Zucker explained in the beginning that there's different kinds of shelters and different for different men and for women and for families. But we don't have a sheet of paper or anything that shows this is this kind of shelter. So we keep on asking the same questions over and over again. Will they have these people and those people? Will it be like this or that? It sounds like we need some sort of is this the first kind of shelter like this in the whole city of New York? There's no other one like this at all that we could compare to, or we're comparing to shelters where there's drug dealers and everything. I mean, it's a different kind of situation where we need some more information on this particular shelter, whether it's a brand new endeavor or something, a new enterprise that's my first question is about the shelter. The second one is, it happens to be what Peter said, where it's located. It's not located on Continental Avenue and Queens Boulevard. It's located on the edge of the community board by the LIE, and I think that's the border. After the LIE, it becomes another community board. Is that community board having the same meeting we're having? Because these people, they don't say, oh, that's the end of Community Board 6, we're walking the other way. They're going to walk wherever they want to walk. I mean, it's a free street, Queens Boulevard. They might be walking on Queens Boulevard. They might be walking on Elliott Avenue. And so I'm saying that there's a lot of those two issues we need to, unless we don't want to keep on talking about this forever, to like solidify it. This is the shelter we're talking about, and this is the neighborhood where we're going to get together with the other community board if you're wondering about people wandering off into other areas, because a lot of the comments were about wandering people. Like, these people, they're going to show up in front of my house and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. Will they stay where and then other people are saying, will they not be let out at certain times? It's like either it's a jail or it's like a free-for-all. I mean, it's like, and we also, the other thing is we're seeing on TV. I'm sorry.
No, but to try and address that question or what the issues you raised there, Herb, the LIE is the dividing line between Rego Park and Elmhurst. So if you're walking westbound on Queens Boulevard towards Queens Center Mall, once you walk underneath that overpass, you are in Elmhurst. That is Community Board 5.
Right.
That has nothing to do with us. We have our hands full dealing with Community Board 6. So I can't speak to what issues or questions that they're raising when these homeless people navigate their way up and down Queens Boulevard.
Oh.
But in terms of the other issue that you raised, I'll try and address that as best I can. It's not a jail. It's simply a roof over their head, providing basic amenities, a couple of meals, a place to shower and brush your teeth. Like, again, these are things we take for granted. Like, it's not They're not living the high life. It's not going to be the Waldorf Astoria or anything like that. In fact, the men who will be staying at this shelter, they're going to be sharing a room. It's 2 to a room.
Yeah, I know.
So I think that's another thing that tends to get overlooked. It's not, again, like I said, it's a hand up to help them out, but it's not a blank check. And it's transitional housing because, yes, the goal is to get them to independent living. So, yeah, they're not, ideally, like, okay, the shelter opens in March, say 5 years from now, March 2029, they should not still be there. They should be living elsewhere, independent on their own, without DSS or DHS assisting them because they've gotten back on their feet. That's the goal. I hope I answered your question.
No, I also, in terms of the liaison, as talking to Community Board 8, in terms of that, I don't know if there's we could see some feedback what they were talking about, that we're talking about, like a similar, I didn't just want to say we're repeating the same thing or inventing the wheel again, but in terms of the
conversation going in circles, I get that. I'm with you on that. But I do want to address these issues now before, the shelters open. So yeah, if there's concerns, if there's questions, put them out there. And that's why I said what I said before. If somebody has a better idea, I'm all ears.
And the other thing is a lot of the responses or comments are influenced by the TV news now, where they talk about the migrant shelters. So people are looking at the same sort of, and this is totally different. It's not like with the migrant shelter, for instance, they put one in Creedmoor. So across the street, they're private homes and the people would go, "Where are you going there?" They also then said, put everyone in Floyd Bennett Field where there's not near anyone. And they had to move everyone because it was all flooded out. So they're having all these issues on TV and we're seeing that. And we're thinking, oh, here we're going to have the same sort of, and it's totally different, less people, and it's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. And
people are making these
typically-
comparisons
Yeah.
because of what they see nowadays. That's all. Okay,
Clarify 2 things real quick, Keith. I want to make it clear to the community at large. There's been some discussion. We've been talking about the family shelter. Understand that even though we know that is coming, we have not actually had a formal presentation yet on that shelter, partly because it's still being built. So we will actually get a presentation on that at some point in time in the future. And that could even be possibly in the 4th quarter of this year, depending on how things go. So I just wanted to clarify that because there's been some discussion around that shelter and that's just not what's happening. There's not been a presentation on that. Really our focus tonight, and I know we cannot talk about the one shelter without discussing the other, but I just wanted to share that tonight that our main focus is the shelter that is moving in, the all-male shelter across the street. The other thing is we said at the top of the meeting, just to the members of the public who have their hands raised, that we cannot take questions from the members of the public tonight in the interest of time and in the interest of being productive. However, we are very interested in addressing your questions. So if you would call the office, or if you prefer to email, which is my preferred mode of communication, you can email us at qn06@cb.nyc.gov. So we're not ignoring you. Please, we don't want to ignore you, but we just need to, we have a lot to get done tonight. And in that vein, I'm going to shut up. Floor is back to you, Keith.
Thank you, Heather. So I just want to add like a few things about the physicality of this actual shelter in general, just in terms of the hotel conversion aspect. This is a common thing that happens. It's actually like basically we'll have two adult males sharing one room. It's actually like I don't want to use the word safer because that's relative, but it's a much more manageable situation than a congregate dormitory style shelter. And shelters usually, they range in size. 100 people is not that large. I've seen shelters go to about 200 folks in one building. 200, beyond 200 is where it starts to get a little bit unmanageable, no matter how many security folks you put in it. So they are usually heavily secured. There is usually a presence there, but 100 seems to be more the lower ends in terms of like how shelters go in terms of overall sizing. And again, 200 is where things start to get unmanageable. By dormitory style, I mean about maybe 10 shelter beds in one big room, as opposed to like two people sharing one room. Two people sharing one room is a bit more manageable as well. So we're looking at, in terms of scale, is a much more manageable shelter than some that are in at the city right now that are more purpose-built from the ground up of a certain clientele. With that, I see Anicia has a question again, and David. So Anicia?
I just want to mention that I live here for 57 years, okay? When I moved to Queens, Rigo Mall, Queens Center Mall, none of that exists, okay? That park, I used to bring my dog to, I walk my dog in that park every day. But since the Alexander Corporation started building that they cross all that area is very isolated. So I stopped going because I was scared. Because in that street, that was a dead end, you used to see a lot of funny things. And sometimes we used to see drug addicts, doing their business. So that's a part of that area that the kids from the nursing home, from the daycare and LEFRAPs, they bring the kids to play there because it's a big playground over there. And a lot of senior citizens, they have benches in that area. They used to sit there. Okay, but since they closed all that area, I don't go there anymore because I don't feel safe. That's all I just want to say.
Well, there's also a lot of construction because if you remember, on the corner of Junction and Horace Harding, that used to be a parking lot, which has been boarded up for quite some time now.
That's
And I'm
what
sure-
I said. That's what I said. Since
I don't
it's
know
been
what they're
boarded up, I don't go there anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to build there, but
It's a very high-rise building that belongs to the Alexander Corporation.
Yeah,
okay.
that's all going to be residential, and it's going to be, I'm going to use air quotes, it's supposed to be affordable housing. But since it's as of right, it'll be affordable housing probably. Not what I think our land use committee is used to defining as affordable housing. I see that David Zucker's hands up now.
Mhm.
May I? May I?
Yes, David. Go.
Okay, it began with Ida. Herb said almost the same thing in a different way, and Heather hit the bullseye. What we don't have are facts. Now, there's plenty of stuff. There's a scorecard. You can Google that. Something that's issued every year. If you understand it, God bless you, because I have no idea what it really means. There's the Comptroller's Annual Review. Again, tables of data. I have no idea what it means. But as Heather said, we have not been presented any quantitative data. It would be nice in a way. She said we haven't been given a presentation, but I would expect it's easier to have a conversation when you begin with the facts, and then you can have your opinions or your observations. We haven't had that. We don't know what more, except I think we have one person who just said he's involved in that area, but we don't have a background to really understand what's going on. I would expect, especially since the organization has the right type of people on staff, they can present a review of their type of place. If they only have one or two, that's sad. But there's plenty of data that they can parse and present to us. And then we can go
David,
forward.
I'm sorry, I'm
By the
confused.
way,
Which data?
what?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just confused. Which data is it that we don't have that we need?
It's everybody's impression are those very big, unmanaged, places that have the drug addicts. By the way, 179th Street, I looked it up, is 179 beds. At least we have 100 beds. In theory, these are much better places than those very large places. You've heard some of the people say it's going to be managed, there's going to be security. That sets them apart. I've walked through these neighborhoods for 40 years. I've never been, assaulted. Maybe I missed something. But to assuage some concerns, not all, it's nice to say, how have they been managed? How many crimes are reported in 1 year. That data, there's something called the precinct report, which is really strange. It comes up if you Google it. It says shelters. It says precinct 69 0, precinct 70 10. I have no idea what that means, but I don't know where the precincts are. Oh, it would say Brooklyn, Queens, etc. There's data out there that can be presented to us. You know, there are 20 shelters just like this in the Queens, Brooklyn area, and here's the results. That's what I would expect to hear. That's how you begin a discussion, but we haven't had that data. So we're working mostly on our own personal experiences, and that's not the best. I mean, it's an important part of the discussion. Don't get me wrong, but it's great. It's better to start with some type of review. And if I'm sorry, if Heather or Keith have the contacts, ask them to help us by presenting a background of these shelters in New York City, or at least Brooklyn and Queens. We don't know about these other places called the Bronx and Manhattan. Not familiar with them, but that's my. I didn't want to say anything tonight because I'm used to, in my background, we don't have a discussion in other organizations. I've been on a couple of boards of organizations. Until you begin with the facts, this is different. Fine, everything's everything in life is a challenge. It's different, but it will help all of us, and then help us to deal with the community when they start voicing, as it pointed out in the beginning, their fears more than their knowledge. It's something to discuss. That's all. I won't say anything more. I'm sorry.
But that's fine. And yes, and I appreciate that. And all that's understood. Before I go to Kendra for her hand up, I just want to just preface this by saying that we've had the opportunity to ask for facts. We've had 2 presentations and the opportunity to actually ask questions. During that time, we had follow-up questions. So the fact that we still have questions, I don't know how many more questions we're going to keep having. I mean, at the end of the day, let's all be cognizant of the fact that, like, this isn't as of a right structure. This can go into our community. We're probably putting forward a recommendation on this, perhaps, or a resolution on this, perhaps, but we really don't have any power over this. It's going to happen. So I think, like, to the extent that we can, if there's more questions that arise tonight that haven't been presented already, and again, I represented tonight a little bit, what they had presented last month. If there's questions that arise that are different from what we've asked previously, we can certainly entertain that. We can certainly put that forward. Mark had some good questions about basically what is the placement rates. That's a fair question. That's something that could be put forward. But again, I think the end goal of this is to kind of arrive at something that's productive, as opposed to more questions that are kind of circular more than anything else. Kendra.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in, and I remember when I first moved to this community and all the discrimination and fear, right? And I've lived here for 8 years, and I'm very open about having a criminal background and being incarcerated at Rikers and even being upstate in prison. So yes, I have felony convictions. And I've experienced homelessness. And I remember when I moved here, all I wanted was to be, given a second chance. And I had a lot of doors closed on me and a lot of, very rude remarks. And I keep hearing some of the same comments. I live on Austin Street and in between Queens Boulevard and on 76 Road. So I live right across from a park, and I've been such a great neighbor for the last 8 years. But if you just saw what you saw on a piece of paper, even today, from some of the comments I've heard, I'm sure all of you would, or folks would not want me to be in this neighborhood, or would think that I would be a bad neighbor. And I think that's the one thing that we keep going back to on this assumption about these 100 people that are going to be placed in this shelter. And I just hope that we can start to see things in a different light and understand that even if people did make mistakes, or even if they were a drug addict, which is actually not terms we use any longer, but even if they were suffering through all of these challenges, that they still need an opportunity to receive support in order to be the best versions for themselves, their families, and their community, which is our community at large, right? So I think instead of the shelter is going to happen, right? With the fair shares, it's going to happen. no matter how bad everyone pushes back on it. I've been in this game for a long time. I've sat on a lot of community advisory boards. I've heard a lot of pushback from communities. And we have in our community advisory board meetings, we have the precinct councils come and meet with us. And every quarter that we have those meetings, we go through the crime stats and how they have not changed due to the shelter that's been there, right? So those are all things that we can do while we have this community advisory board, and we can all really pull together and make sure that we do offer the best supports and hold DHS and this other agency accountable to get people placed. And one other thing I'll say, just from working in the housing realm and getting folks placed, it's we can ask for a placement rate, and I'm happy that I hope that we do, but understanding that every person's needs are different, and so it's very hard. Like, we're working with human beings, and sometimes when we talk about data, it's numbers. We want everybody to be placed right away. We want everybody employed right away. We want everybody's 10, 20 years of whatever problems, or even just last couple years of how they became homeless to begin with. We want it fixed right away in a number. And we're dealing with human beings, right? With emotions, with say people that need to learn and grow. So I think, like, as a community, I just hope that we can really focus on what we're going to do to ensure that this is implemented in the best way, and how we can start breaking that stigma around people with mental health concerns, people with substance use disorders, people with criminal backgrounds, because I've been your neighbor for the last decade. And I still, if you didn't know me in this capacity and you just saw my rap sheet and just that paper, you would make a completely different assumption. And I will be the first one that will volunteer my services at this adult male shelter. I've worked with adult men in shelters for the last 10 years. And it's not something to be fearful of, right? There's so many protections in so many different places. They're just human beings like all the rest of us. And everyone just wants to be treated fairly and equitably. So I think that's just what I really hope we can, like, come off this call with, instead of, really focusing on the data. Like, we're talking about human beings who don't have homes. And if you've ever been homeless, like, that feeling of hopelessness, that's what we should be at the forefront. And then we can worry about making sure that everything's right on the back. And I care about my community. Like I said, I live across from Park. I know all my neighbors. I love my community and love my neighbors and family that I've created here. So I want us all to be safe as well. Me being here hasn't made it not safe. That's, I think, the point that I want to make. And just because we're going to have the shelter, that does not automatically mean that it's not going to be unsafe as well. We are such a strong community, and I think we can really pull together on this community advisory board and make sure that both sides really get what they need, and we can help support people the best. So that's all I just wanted to add.
Thank you, Kendra. That is so appreciated. I just to hear that context and that just overall approach. And I think with that, I think we need to shift gears a little bit, kind of through the lens that Kendra just created for us, and really talk about how we can kind of put forward some semblance of a recommendation that kind of assuages our concerns and really kind of holds the provider and DHS the task on how this is operated. I mean, I myself had some concerns, just given the fact that, like, they didn't really seem to be privy to perhaps putting forward certain elements of the building itself to be open to the community. In terms of, like, in order to place the shelter in a district, sometimes you have to kind of, like, give a little bit. It's not just kind of placing it in as an entity and expecting the community to, like, react to it. Why don't you set aside perhaps like a larger multi-purpose room that can be used by the community for example, community board meetings, things like that. I think sometimes, like, when providers do place things in communities, they have to consider that it's part of a back and forth. It's part of a dialogue, or it should be a dialogue. So maybe that's just one concern that I had, just in terms of how you can effectively really try to bridge these gaps in these settings. So with that, do we want to
Can I
maybe...
say something, Keith?
I need to say yes, please.
The representative from Gennaro is on the call.
Sorry?
The representative from Gennaro's, the councilman, is on the call.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
He is?
she is.
Okay. I live in this neighborhood for many, many years, and we always feel like a stepchild. Every single senator, representative, assemblyman, councilman, they always forget our area, which is start from Rego Park, from Queens Boulevard to 108th Street, from 63rd Drive to Horace Harding Expressway. So we want them to get involved on this and get commitments from these shelters, people that is the first shelter that they have in New York, to victims to stay on the guidelines, because the neighborhood is open up arm because they just find out about this thing. It's not myself, it's everybody's just talking about this shelter. So the politician should come around and talk to the people in this neighborhood and say, like, we're going to be with you guys and we're going to protect your security and the way this neighborhood was before.
Well, I would just say that before I let the representative respond. The fact that Janelle sent the rep, I find that telling. As I alluded to in previous conversations, my councilman is Robert Holden. And when they opened the shelter in CB5, he made his opposition known. And I imagine if he was here or if he had a representative here, that would be the same. He would be opposed to the shelter. So I think that the fact that Janelle's representative is here, I would like to see that as a sign of support. I could be wrong, but I will let the representative speak for him or herself. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, as many of you know, we just got this part of the district in January, and I believe that when the announcement was made or DHS decided about this was back in December. So right now we're looking to meet with DHS and also talk with Community Board 6. We've had a lot of people call our office about it, and we're looking into it to, see what's going on with the shelter. But the council member in the past for another shelter, I think it was the Briarwood shelter, he was opposed to the way that it was supposed to be, and he had dealt with the mayor's office. So it's important to him that his constituents and community members are safe, that they feel safe, and that they feel that they're heard on this issue.
Kelly, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. We're glad to meet your acquaintance sometimes. And we look forward to working with you in the future. So I just wanted to take a moment to say welcome, thank you, and glad to meet your acquaintance and glad to see you're on the team.
Thank you. And is there a way to put my email in a chat here or something so that if
No, we don't, the chat isn't tonight. So if you want to, can you just speak it out loud? I'm sorry, no, that's not perfect, but could you do that?
Yeah. So if anyone wants to email me, so my name is Kelly Sexton and my email address is ksexton, SEXTON @council.nyc.gov. And if you don't get that, you could always just call the office. I also pick up the phones. I do constituent services. If any of you have any issues, so you can just call and ask for me.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And just to be clear, one note on Robert Holden, every shelter is different. So, when he comes in and is going to be, presiding, so to speak, over the family shelter, let's give him a fair shake. This could be a different circumstance, just like, like to Kendra's point, some of the thoughts that we have about shelters, let's see, let's get to know him a bit more and see, if I know that he will likely have concerns with the provider. He's made that known. That's public news. So we'll have to kind of work with that. But, just understand not every shelter is the same. And I think this one may be a little different in that it's a family shelter. So it's sort of softer, so to speak, of a subject, I think, than the one we're dealing with tonight. So we shall see. Maybe leopards have new spots. I don't see any. So Keith, I'm gonna turn this back to you. I don't see any more hands tonight right now.
I have my hand up.
Oh, John, I'm sorry.
I know. Well, I guess I'm fading into the furniture. But I just wanted to raise a couple of suggestions, really looking forward as items that might be of interest. One for the single shelter. I mean, given the fact that we're talking about a population that is going to be rather closely screened, and where there'd be probably a fair amount of people who are employment ready. I think it's an important thing for us to do is to try to take advantage of the fact that the shelter is located really very close to a lot of significant employers. I mean, you got the Regal Park Mall, you got the Queens Mall. You don't have to, you can go across the boundary to get to that. And it might very well be that that kind of things like job placement and things like that might be something that the sponsor might want to, that the operator might want to really focus on. It might be a place where you might be able to get people who are not employed, and therefore that could help. And I just think, given the very close resources, that might be something. The other suggestion, and I know that I know the focus is mostly on the single shelter, but on the family shelter, I think that when you meet with both the agency, but also with the really probably with DHS even more so, is to try to get some sort of a commitment that to the extent possible, the families that are located there had residents that were as close to the area as possible. This is a particularly important thing because particularly if the families have school-age kids, sometimes when they were going across in other boroughs, just simply having to go to the time spent going across the city to go to school had been a problem. And I think that since we have some time here, the idea of trying to get people who, particularly with school-age kids who are attending schools that are either in our area or relatively close to it, I think would be a plus. And even for those where it can't be done, perhaps working with some of the local schools in our district to try to see that they could be oriented more seamlessly into the student body are items that can be done, or things that I think both the community advisory board can do, and I think just in discussion. So I think these are two areas where we could be a little creative, and in particularly with the family, I think important because it really was an issue that a lot of school-age kids were really losing school time, that they're when they really either had to transfer to a school they did not know, or had to go across the city to continue. So I think these are two fertile areas that I would recommend that the committee and the advisory board really takes a look at. So that's just my 2 cents.
Duly noted, John. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Does anyone else have any thoughts to share?
It looks like we could probably move into talking about, I guess, the resolution at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've had the airing of the grievances part of the meeting, so to speak.
We certainly did. Okay, so definitely stepping forward, if we want to consider what basically lands within two buckets, basically like a resolution that we can kind of put forward and outstanding questions that we still have on the matter. So I think I just want to share my screen again, just so I can just kind of remind everyone about the thoughtful resolution that was put forward. And I'm blanking on the gentleman's name right now, but that was submitted as part.
Yeah, Michael Dunn.
Thank you,
At the
thank you.
board meeting or earlier this month, and Peter sent out his version earlier today.
Right.
To a few people. Everyone hasn't seen it yet.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start by just framing Michael Dunn's resolution. It's kind of illustrating it, basically kind of skipping ahead to, knowing that the situation appears to be inevitable, just what could be put forward as a way to kind of assuage some of the valid concerns that were put forward, and just kind of like alleviate some of the anxieties and put in place basically checks. And I want to kind of highlight this paragraph where I don't know if I've seen this on certain shelters that are open, but hey, it's a recommendation, basically that the shelter, and again, really focusing on the single adult male shelter, not the family shelter at this point. We're going to remove that from the conversation. but basically placing checks in place so that the first 3 months it opens at no more than 50% capacity. To really kind of like see how the wheels hit the ground, if there's any concerns that arise from the community, and then convene a meeting, a public roundtable meeting between DHS, DHI, CB6 to 1112, affected residents and business owners, talk about problems as a way to kind of move through these things so that there is some semblance of guardrails that are put up. Something that we can certainly consider. There was a point that was also raised as well about basically community preference for disaster emergency situations. I think this was raised during the board meetings. I think DSS pushed back on that a little bit, but basically kind of stating that there should be some beds on hand that are available. Should a disaster occur, a community member can have first priority, or at least be moved to the top of the list. I know the beds aren't put aside in shelters. This is why there's a curfew, because basically, like at the end of every evening, if there's an available bed, someone is told that has a need from the city and placed into that bed. So things are usually not kind of held. But I just want to start by just kind of raising that to the committees for a conversation as to is this something that we would perhaps adopt as part of a recommendation if we choose to put one forward. Peter.
Thanks, and if anyone else wants to put in a comment first, I'll yield. But if I think there's that first paragraph that you mentioned. I liked that Mr. Dunn wanted to try and create some sort of enforcement mechanism. The unfortunate reality is that that kind of a condition, saying that you can only open at 50% first, and then only if it passes muster, then you can go to full capacity. In terms of procurement, in terms of the contracts that the city does, that's just not going to fly. They would never agree to that because it's the operators, the hotel, all these folks, they can't just start off at 50% and then scale it up. But at the same time, I think some of the rest of what Michael had written in there, the idea that we need to make sure that the community is looking at what's happening there, and also perhaps express an intent that if we don't see that issues that come up are addressed properly, then our next action might be to ask the city and the BP to close the shelter if it's not meeting up to specs. May I share my screen with some of the
Yes, absolutely.
changes I made? So what I did is I started with, first I have to get it up right. I started with Mr. Dunn's resolution, and where is it? Now I can't find it on. I started with Mr. Dunn's resolution, and I think finding what I could share or not share. But I started with the resolution, and okay, it looks like I'm sharing the right thing. You should all see the resolution. Do you see that that's been edited?
I see something else.
CB6 resolution on homeless shelters, done draft base.
No, I see a spreadsheet
Yeah.
of cases. I think that's not something you want us to see.
I'm covering my eyes. I didn't see that.
Yeah, no, that's the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm having technical problems today, and I apologize for that. Usually I'm a little bit more savvy, but today is not that day. Let me try one more time, trying to close things so that I don't have the option. Share this window. This looks better. Okay, now do you see?
Nothing.
Not yet.
I see all of us.
Oh, wait.
Okay.
I see it. There it is.
Sorry, this is becoming farcical, and I apologize. Okay.
Yes.
So now you should see the resolution, right? So that first paragraph that Keith was talking about is here. That is this one. And so rather than have it open on a trial basis at 50%, we require that within 3 months, maybe we make this as short as 30 days after opening each facility. We have the community advisory board meet. And that includes, I keep Mr. Dunn's language about who should be on there, among others. And we've actually already proposed a list of folks to be appointed to the CAB, which would include Mr. Dunn, incidentally. And then I've written the CAB will continue to meet at least monthly while any outstanding issues remain unresolved. I think what DHS has told us is that typically CABs meet quarterly, but maybe in the beginning we want to hold them to a more rigorous schedule. You know, and then I continue if certain issues or problems are so egregious or dangerous and remain unresolved after an additional 3 months, then Community Board 6 will request to the Greensboro president and the mayor that the facility cease operations. So most of this is actually Mr. Dunn's language. I just changed up some of the language to make it fit kind of the bureaucratic universe. But it's a way of suggesting that, you know, there is an action that we may take, and hopefully they would like to not see us take, so they have an interest in resolving issues. I then added the next paragraph talking about how DHS and the operators, which are West Tab and CHI, depending on which facility we're talking about, just so people understand this resolution seeks to address both facilities. They also provide us immediate updates to whenever there's substantive changes to how they operate the facility or the services that might be provided there or what security measures. So if anything changes from what they've told us as of today, they need to immediately update us so that we know what's going on. Also that they inform us if there's any criminal activity or other serious incidents. I think you and Kandra have stated what is actually the data shows is that really you don't see a necessary uptick in any incidents. But it is people's concern, so let's provide a mechanism so that if there is any such activity, we're supposed to be told right away. You know, it shouldn't get buried or anything like that. And, you know, if they're either failing to provide us with those updates or we do see persistent patterns of problems, then again, our recourse might be to request that the facility be closed. And then I keep most of that next paragraph, which is talking about the idea of can we use these facilities for emergency placement of folks in case we have like what happened in Sunnyside the other month and an entire building is burned out and we immediately need facilities. I think the experts would probably say logistically and realistically, you can't necessarily, you know, kind of just use a facility of this nature to just put families in, but I don't think it's a bad thing to ask for, just in case that is possible, because if we are losing the area hotel, and if we're able to keep folks in community, should that event happen, I think that would be a good thing, and just leave it for them to explain to us why it can't be done, but I don't think it's a bad thing for us to ask for. That's a very fast, very high Eagles view of some of the changes I made. I made some other changes to the whereas clauses as well. I'm happy to talk about those if anyone wants to get into them. But that's the meat of what I did. I did that and I circulated that to Keith, Latrice, and Heather just before this meeting. Unfortunately, I didn't have more time than that before getting to this. But I thought to at least take a stab at creating something so that we're moving the resolution forward. And you know, I'm taking no pride of authorship. It doesn't have to look like this in the end. It's really just an initial effort that I put out there. Did I stop sharing or you want to leave this up?
I think we can leave this up a little bit. Yeah, no, I think this is great. I just as a way to kind of like, you know, move into this conversation, kind of positive path forward that addresses the valid community concerns and kind of assuages some of the anxieties, and also put some guardrails up and some checks and balances, and maybe like gives a little more teeth to the community action board, just in terms of like the timelines that are proposed and the checks and balances that are proposed, and actually forcing the issue with having data and metrics, placed out there to be able to kind of measure how well those spaces are performing, and if there are any documented negligible impacts on the community.
Keith, it looks like Heidi has joined us, and she has her hand raised.
Oh, thank you, Heather.
Welcome.
Heidi, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question that I don't know if we want to address, but there are times that homeless shelters are now being changed to house migrants. And I don't know if we want to put something in if they decide to change the nature overnight or over time, that they have to certainly let us know what they're doing in advance.
That's a good point. We could put in that we understand that this is a population that's going to be single adult males only, and should there be any change to that demographic, we should be notified. Perhaps it's
in this paragraph here, there is, that would be a change in the operation of the facility.
right.
That would trigger. One other thing someone mentioned earlier, and it's could put it in here, and also might address a bit of Heidi's issue as well, as that we should stipulate a desire for kind of as much as possible ensure that folks from within the community board who need shelter are provided with space at this facility. So that might help a little bit. But yeah, I do think this paragraph here addresses that issue, that we would be notified in that case. We can make it more explicit.
I would prefer,
for example.
What does that have to do with migrants? I didn't
Well,
understand.
no, we can say operation and or a population, just so it's like crystal
Be
clear.
single man migrants.
That's a different element.
Yeah.
It's a different type of a shelter, and
Yeah.
there are times in the city right now, because of the migrant crisis, that they are taking anything and everything and converting it all over the city to migrant shelters. So if they're telling us this is for one purpose, I think that we may want to be told if they decide overnight to change the purpose.
I guess my concern about that is that I'm sure you don't intend for it to be this way, but are we veering, tiptoeing on xenophobia with that?
No, I don't think so, Mr. Chase. I think the concern is that there has been an overwhelming problem in the city where they are concerned that we have X number of New Yorkers that are housing insecure. And so there are, and the concern is that a lot of times what is happening, and I've seen this, is that they don't notify communities in a timely fashion. They will say things like, we let you know as soon as we could. And I'm wondering also if the emergency sort of situation, the emergent nature of the migrant situation has sort of allowed some of this. And so what has happened is the programming, like when Peter talks about like the focus, that completely changes the focus, because the programming for a migrant shelter is 1,000 times different than the programming for a single male shelter. So that is going to be a real shift in the community, because there begins to be other partners involved, that like the federal government partners and so on. So that is a real shift in a shelter, that there should be notification. And I know from being in meetings that these things are just done very abruptly. It's almost like that whole rule of it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And so to Heidi's point, I think she has probably seen what I've seen, where this is just sort of happening. And I think what we're making clear is that should the entire focus of this particular center change, we need to know whether that entire focus be from to migrant shelter, or whether that entire focus change to single female, or whether they add another audience to this particular shelter. We're just saying that we need to be notified. And I think we have concerns in the community in that we were given such short notice on this particular shelter, as it were. We literally, I believe, I might be wrong, didn't get notice until I believe November. And so that's not much time when the projected opening is the end of Q1. So I think, and Heidi, I'm not trying to speak for you, but I think it just comes with a concern that there is an overwhelming shift in programming from a New Yorker all-male shelter to a migrant shelter that is now going to have so many agencies and so many branches of government involved. It's a whole
So
different.
I just
I-
think that we should add a couple of sentences into that, or or as an example or something, just so that we
Yeah.
have it in there. Peter, just, so.
I did actually. If you see your screen, so I've now the intent of this paragraph that I added actually was to ensure that something like this we'd get notice of. But you'll see now, starting towards the end of the second line, whenever there are.
I need you to make it bigger for me to see it. Sorry.
You click,
No,
if
that's
you click on your
okay.
screen, Heidi, are you on your phone or computer?
I'm on the computer.
Okay, if you look right underneath where the people are at the top, you should see like something that says like something
there it
percent.
is.
Right, no, I just needed what
No, you
Peter
could do
now
it just
did.
now.
There we go.
Okay,
So here I've added an example, right? So
That's great.
where there are substantive changes to the operation of the facility, e.g. housing of migrant individuals,
Perfect.
as an
Thank
example.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Thank you,
That's
sir.
great. That's
You're
great.
welcome.
Just
Awesome.
so I'm clear, I don't disagree with anything that was said. I just want y'all to be aware that, again, yes, if there's a shift in the people that are going to be served by the shelter, yes, by all means, we should know about it. But I think you just want to be careful that you don't find yourself, dabbling in xenophobia. That's all. So I just want
I
to be
think that's a
clear
fair
on
point. Absolutely.
Absolutely fair point, Richard. Thank you.
right now that Mayor Adams has spoken about constantly is that the federal government isn't doing enough to help him mitigate this crisis. So when Heather speaks about various agencies, I'm thinking, okay, well, what agencies is she referring to? Because he's been beating the drum with Governor Hochul and President Biden, and well, so far it hasn't been resolved in a satisfactory manner. So I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Could I just mention something? In terms of the shelter not opening yet, and then when it does open, there'll be a period of time where it's not occupied or partially occupied. But once it's fully occupied, the migrant situation on a shelter that's fully occupied, they're not going to move people out of there and put migrants in. So our concern is now about this issue when building a new shelter, and then the city might say, oh, here's a brand new shelter, no one is living there yet, and let's do X, Y, Z. It's not when they're already living there. So I think it's something to address now, and I don't know how much control you have over that.
I don't think that's going to be the case, sir, because right now the hotel is still operating as a hotel. I imagine that as soon as DSS takes a possession via contract, they're going to go to immediately
No, I don't know how much
renovate the
power
space.
we
'cause-
have to
'cause
say
they're
anything
they're
about
looking
it
to
either.
open in Q1. Yeah, I don't think they would place people in on such a very short
Okay,
basis.
but people are going to ask these questions.
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I do have a project that's supposed to be changing over to supportive housing, and right now it's being used to house migrants en masse, like 500 of them in the city. So there's a lot involved in placing migrants. It's not just one migrant will end up at a shelter. It's pretty much en masse.
The worst case that I saw
we would be
was
made aware.
this Floyd Benefield situation. I don't know if anyone realized it, but they complained originally, why are they going to put people over there where it's below seawater and it'll be flooded and everything? And then they put hundreds of people there. The whole place got flooded. They all went to Midwood High School. So it was a disaster to begin with. And they just needed to do something. So they threw everyone out, out there in the middle of nowhere. it's really like terrible to think that, you know, they have to deal with all this situation now.
But that
Well,
touches on lack of planning, a lack of
Yeah,
foresight.
I mean, it's
The
like,
whole
yeah.
point of us having these meetings. We want to address these issues now.
yeah, of course.
But like basically, you want to diffuse the situation before it becomes a situation, and that's why I made the comment that I made earlier.
That's right.
I understand, Heidi's concerns, and I don't disagree with anything that she said or Heather said. But I'm just basically saying be careful. That's all I'm saying.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
And those points are all well taken. Herb, you brought up something that like I do want to kind of underscore a little bit, and the fact that this is not a permanent shelter. This shelter has a 5-year contract. That's it. With a 4-year renewal that follows. What we could put into our resolution is perhaps almost a check, where perhaps like at the end of the 5 years, towards the end of the contract, being up, they have to come back in front of the community board, almost like what we do with our liquor licenses, just as a way to kind of prove out too that even though we have all these other checks and balances in place for like CABs and having conversations openly with the community, there is basically the ability for the community board to basically say, no, you're a bad actor, where we do not recommend having this recertified. So that's another check, because it is not, again, it's not a permanent acquisition.
Quick
Just doing a quick time check. It's 8:32.
Yeah.
It's been an hour and a half. I'm not sure what else y'all want to achieve tonight. So just be in time checker here.
Right, well, I want to second.
Go ahead, Mark.
I want to second Peter's. She just amended it, so I want to second Peter's amended resolution just so we can move it forward.
Can I just real quick? I just had
Second,
one
hold
more
on.
comment about the CAB meetings. You wrote at least monthly. I do want to just warn that that's going to be hard for the police, because nobody is getting paid to actually do the CAB. So everybody from the DSS, from the provider, from the precinct, from the community, all those people have to volunteer their time. So it's not just about like the program, it's also about like the precinct. It's very hard to get the precinct, like that's an extra meeting now every month. So maybe like at least every other month, if you didn't want to do it quarterly. But I will just warn that monthly is like really hard on everybody's calendar, not just the provider, but even like community members. That's a whole nother, because I really would love to be a part of the CAB, but that's then again a whole nother meeting to monthly.
Okay, so I would like to add a friendly amendment to your motion as well as Keith's motion. The CAB should meet quarterly, just like the committee for those without shelter, we meet quarterly. So this CAB would meet quarterly. And in terms of renewal, like Keith mentioned just a few minutes ago about at the end of the 5-year contract, how about an annual review? Just like at most jobs, you get an annual evaluation. So I would say at the end of each year, we evaluate whether or not this facility is a good faith actor serving their constituents as well as the community at large. So those would be my friendly amendments. Thank you.
And whether it's every other month or quarterly, when I was responsible for a CAB, I had one community where if any of those community members reached out, because I was like the lead of the organization, we were the service provider, we responded. I called community members. We brought folks to volunteer to clean up parks. So like I want the provider to know that in that form of the CAB that they do have a responsibility to like the community members that are other fellow members of the CAB that are going to be reaching out to them. So I don't want you to think that it's just like, oh, once a quarter and that's all they're going to hear. That's another reason. It's a really extensive process. And I had people that I had built relationships with where we had talked every other week, and they were a part of like the tenant association that was, a block or two away, and there was a park there and all these things. So just know that like really letting that, I want an involved CAB from the provider angle as well, where they are responding to the CAB members, especially if it is going to be meeting quarterly. So that would just be my last thing, and I promise I'm done now.
Thank you, Kendra.
I see Latrice and I see Mark's hand.
Oh, no, I just spoke. I already saw. I'll take my hand down. Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, I'll just. Can we somehow include what Kendra just was saying? That somehow saying let the CAB meet quarterly, but then somehow the CAB has regular contact, ongoing contact with community members of the CAB?
So as I understood what Kendra was saying, first I've changed it. The CAB will continue to meet at least quarterly. But as I understood Kendra, and you correct me, of course, I think what was being explained was that the nature of the CAB is such that, even though the meetings are quarterly, in between meetings, these members are, reaching out to each other and pointing out what issues aren't being addressed. And
Yeah, and
so that's
we
inherent.
had a business, a bodega, for instance, that said that one of our residents had, stolen something or whatever. We were we took it upon ourselves to be responsible to go speak with that business owner. Like, we were really good neighbors, and that's what we want this provider that is providing this service to be. So however you can kind of capture those words, like we'll do our end and be good neighbors on our end, but we want to make sure that they also, respond to the community's needs if there is a challenge or an issue as it arises, not waiting till every quarter to address every challenge, right? I think is the key, because that's how the community really built a strong relationship with us. They knew that they could call us day or night if something did happen, and we would make sure that we would, take all the steps that we needed to do to rectify whatever that situation was. So it's, the onus is on of a CAB for that provider to really take the ownership, but we want to make sure that we can have our challenges addressed in a timely fashion should they arise.
And to remind people as well, the community board isn't going anywhere. So should there be an issue that somebody in the community sees and they don't know how to reach the CAB, they can always reach the community board, and then they, as participants of the CAB, can then do that. So there shouldn't be any concern that, if they're not meeting this month, we can address this problem. Well, sure, if you happen to see something that is dangerous or problematic, definitely pick up the phone, call the office, or log onto your computer, send us an email, and then we can push it up, because sometimes we understand that the layers of government are complex. And so sometimes we don't know who to reach out to. When you don't know, call us. We're like Ghostbusters, but for government. And so I want you guys to just be thinking about that as well, that maybe some of this anxiety around, when the CAB does or doesn't meet. My only suggestion was, when we were working on this, was I think about when things begin. When things begin, no matter what it is, it's bumpy. Marriages, having a baby, a new job, all of that kind of stuff is bumpy. So I just thought that at the beginning, to sort of say within the first 30 days, we have our first CAB meeting, to really touch base. How are things going? So that we're not waiting till like the end of a quarter, so that anything that happens, you're able to nip it in the bud. And so to me, I felt like that would help. And I think it would also help build community trust, because they would know that we're not lingering on anything, if there is anything to be lingered on.
Should we make this, I have it at 3 months, but you're saying 30 days.
I was saying, like, upon opening, that the first CAB meeting be within 30 days, and then we could move to a quarterly structure after that. So let's say it were to open in April. So the first meeting would be between April and May 1. And then after that, it would be in the next quarter and the next quarter. You know what I mean? Just so that in case there is anything in the first 30 days, we're able to sort of nip it in the bud before it gets bigger. And again, if something happens in the first 5 days and you call the community board, it doesn't mean we're going to wait 30 days to address that. Does that shake?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I've made that change. No later than 30 days after the opening of each facility, DHS will convene the CAB, which includes these various groups. The CAB will continue to meet at least quarterly. It is expected that the operators will endeavor to be good neighbors and address issues that arise proactively without waiting for prompting or feedback from the members of the CAB. If certain issues or problems are so egregious and or dangerous and remain unresolved after an additional 3 months, I was thinking maybe getting rid of this time limit so we don't have to. Anyway, if they remain unresolved, then the community board will request that the facility cease operations.
Right. I actually like the time
Does
limit.
that get to the concerns that just came up?
I see
I think so.
Christine's hand up.
That's okay, Heather. I don't need to, I basically was gonna say what you said, that just like in between community board meetings, if you have a concern, you can always call the office. From the day that the shelter opens, we will be fielding calls just as the staff has been, since last week's community board meeting. So anytime you have a question, you can always call the community board office and we'll try to get you an answer. I just don't want people to build up all their questions waiting for the next CAB meeting when we can probably either get an answer for you or speak to the agency at our district service cabinet meeting and try to get answers quicker than the quarterly meeting. So that was what I was going to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think we need to put that in the resolution because that's going to be inherent. That's just the way we're going to operate.
No, my hand was up from before. Sorry, Peter.
Nope, it's all good.
No worries, Kristen. I actually do like
Should I get rid of this little timeline I had in there and remain unresolved after an additional 3 months. I'm not
I
sure.
actually like the timeline.
Yes, Peter, I think that
I feel like it gives teeth to it because I think if there's no timeline, it can kind of languish. It can go on indefinitely. I think by kind of assigning a timeline, we're kind of putting forward to the community that there is an end. There is kind of like a measure, a metric that basically says, all right, enough is enough.
That's a pro, and I heard Heidi maybe thinks differently.
Peter, I would think that maybe instead of putting the 3 months, may remain unresolved, maybe put after 2 or 3 notices, whatever you want, so that if the community board is giving them notices that this is a problem and then another notice is given, that at that point, so you don't have to necessarily wait 3 months if we have chaos. And hopefully we won't. But tying something to notice rather than months, we may be better served.
I think that works. That might be easier this way we also have it documented. We've sent the first notice.
Exactly.
We can say,
Send
2
the first notice,
notices
this is
within,
happening.
right. Resolved after 2 notices within 60 days or 90 days. And then that has the feel of something that's a little bit more easier for our office to do and keep track of.
Right.
So unresolved after 2 notices, should I say within 60 days?
60 days sounds reasonable. To me, anyway. 60 days sounds reasonable.
I agree.
Yeah, we it's our resolution. We might as well push for the shorter deadline so that, we're kind of ultimately at the end of the day, if we're being honest, relying on their good graces to comply, but at least it puts them on notice of how we're going to follow all of this and what action we'll take if we don't see compliance.
All right.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Is there anything big missing from what we have so far?
I don't believe so.
Nope. I'm gonna the room really quickly. I don't see any
This
hands.
current version has a lot of crossouts and additions. Might the best, is it something we want to vote on tonight? It would be like a straw vote since it would require the board actually to resolve it. Or is it more something that I can kind of put this in a final proposed form so that you see a clean document that can be circulated between the 2 committees for, how do you want to do it? It's what I'm asking.
Speaking for myself, I would want to see a final document. Like right now, this is like an unpolished, what you presented earlier tonight is like an unpolished gem. And I think what should be presented to the committees in the end should be, a polished stone. So that's my take. I won't speak for Keith.
I think my take is that the overall gist is there in terms of the items that we're going to be putting forward to the board. I think we can certainly have a final copy circulated to both committees. But I think like in the interest of kind of walking out of tonight's meeting with a path forward, I'd be cool with like something like a voice vote that just basically okays the premise, knowing that some wordsmithing might be required, just to clean it up.
Okay, so like a straw poll vote on basically this, advising the board whether overall we are supportive or not supportive of such a resolution. I'll clean it up. We'll circulate it amongst everybody before the next full board meeting to see if there's any specific changes that need to be made, finish the cleanup, and then when we get to the full board meeting, they can receive the finished resolution with our straw vote. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some nodding heads.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
Totally in favor.
Okay.
Second that.
Maybe
Okay,
if we
so
stop, maybe if we could stop sharing now, since we all have a gist, so we
Sure,
can all
I'll
see
do
each other,
that.
that might be helpful.
there you go. You
That's
should be
great.
able to have your
Yeah.
screens back.
You're one, okay, great, thank you.
All right.
All right,
I guess, do a quick voice vote. All in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone
Um,
opposed?
Abstain for cause.
oh, and I
Thank
have
you,
to
John.
abstain too, I'm not on this committee.
Okay.
I
Thank you,
vote
John.
for
Thank you,
fun.
Heather. All right, awesome. So I want to thank everyone for your time and just this incredibly robust conversation tonight. So I think we made some good progress. Thank you again for the hour and 48 minutes that everyone spent, including the members of the public that hung out to kind of join be part of the conversation. And yes, we look forward to next steps, and we're talking about this at the next board meeting as well.
Great.
Our email address, qn06@cb.nyc.gov, so that attendees from the public, you can send in your comments to us as well.
And then Keith, any remaining questions? If you could get those to Christine by what, today's Tuesday, probably by Thursday, Christine, is that good? Because we need to get their answers back before our next community board meeting so we can distribute them.
Yeah, I'll summarize some of the questions that I heard and pass forward.
Okay, great. Guys, this was a good meeting. You know, I really appreciate this. It's interesting. And in preparation for my soul for this meeting, I was researching and I couldn't find a religion in the world that didn't prioritize, housing one another. In fact, in Buddhism, they say one person's suffering is my suffering. And so when you do look, so to me, it kind of like helped feed my soul in preparation for this meeting that we are called to care for one another. So I want to thank you all for this dialogue tonight. It was really helpful. I want to thank Kendra and Latrice for their transparency with their life story. Saying these things out loud takes a lot of courage and bravery. So I want to thank you for all that. And Keith, thank you for your wisdom. And Peter, for your ability to whip a resolution together. I couldn't do that in 3 weeks. So thank you all.
All right.
All right.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
See everyone Thursday.
Everyone.
Good night.